Systems Incorporated and our webinar presentation, Which Transfer Paper Do I Use for This? The webinar will begin shortly, but before it does, I'd like to cover a couple of quick points. You may notice on your webinar browser that there is a section where you can submit questions regarding the webinar. Please feel free to do so. While we may not be able to address all questions during the presentation, I will address and answer all questions and put it in an open forum format so that you can have access to it after the presentation. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation. Also, the president and CEO of our company, Mr. David Gross, normally likes to announce the beginning of these webinars. Unfortunately, he is stuck in Newark, New Jersey today due to flight delays. So while he may not be here in person, he is here in spirit, and I can assure you that he is monitoring this webinar for quality control purposes. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Which Transfer Paper Do I Use for This? Presented by Conde Systems and Conde TV. My name is Douglas DeWitt. I am a product manager here at Conde Systems Incorporated. I am in charge of our transfer paper and color laser printer divisions. I have been doing this job with the company for going on 9 years now, but I have been employed at Conde Systems for the past 23 years. So hopefully my knowledge and expertise will be able to pass along to you today in this presentation. In regards to the presentation, a couple of things to note here. We will be giving away prizes at the end of the presentation. So please make sure to tune in through the presentation to the end to figure out if you are one of our lucky prize winners for attending. Next thing we need to cover is that this is an educational webinar. It is not designed to be a sales tool. The purpose of this webinar is to educate you on the many aspects of different t-shirt transfer papers on the market, to provide you with the information so that you can make an informed decision in regards to the paper that's going to work best for your production purposes. Also, let's go ahead and cover some legal stuff. Information used in this presentation was compiled between January 30th and February 1st, 2017 from manufacturers' websites and specifications. Understand that the views and opinions expressed in this presentation may not reflect the views and opinions of Conde Systems Incorporated or the views and opinions of other manufacturers or distributors listed in this presentation. And again, this presentation is for education purposes only. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. Conde Systems Incorporated, along with Conde TV, National Business Media, and the NBM shows would like to present Which Transfer Paper Do I Use for This? In regards to compiling this particular webinar and presentation, the president and CEO of our company, David Gross, approached me and asked if I could create a new topic to address to the NBM audience and to the Conde audience in general. The presentation that I gave last year regarding white toner printers versus direct-to-garment printers, David wanted me to come up with a new topic. And his suggestion was to take common questions that people ask and see if we can create a value-added topic that would make a good presentation. So I thought about the 3 most common questions I get asked on a regular basis. I would say the 3rd most common question I get is, may I ask you one more question? Now, in this regard, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have an open forum, a 90-minute question and answer session where people can literally rattle off their questions or concerns about t-shirt transfer paper and kind of do it in an into format, aka like a Robin Williams. I thought about it, but I thought that might be a little bit difficult to pull off. So I thought about the 2nd question I get asked all the time. What am I doing wrong? In this regard, I thought about it would be interesting to have an educational seminar where people actually brought in their mistakes in regards to using transfer paper and see if we could work together in an open format to diagnose the mistakes. But I would probably say the most common question I get asked here at Conde Systems as a product manager is, which transfer paper do I use for this? So I thought this would make a great topic for an educational presentation and a webinar. So let's go ahead and figure out which transfer paper do I use for this. What we've got to understand is that when it comes to transfer paper, we've got to categorize our transfer paper in order to know which papers are going to work on particular fabrics or substrates. Now, how I categorize is I run through 4 basic questions that I ask myself regarding picking out a t-shirt transfer paper. The first question that I ask is, what type of printer will be used for the production? Will it be an inkjet printer? Will it be a color laser printer? Will it be one of the newer white toner printers on the market? Or a color laser printer or color laser copier? So when it comes to transfer paper, the first thing we've got to understand is they are broken down by printer platform. And in this presentation, we're primarily going to focus on inkjet t-shirt transfer papers, color laser t-shirt transfer papers, and what I would call high-speed color laser copiers. The next thing we have to ask ourselves is, what type of graphic are we going to use to decorate our garment or our substrate? Are we going to use a line art or clip art graphic, maybe something that was hand drawn and scanned in? Are we going to use a vectorized design, something that has definite lines, definite shades, which is a pretty typical format in regard to artwork out there. If you're designing in CorelDRAW or you're designing in Adobe Illustrator, you are using vectorized format. Or are we going to use a bitmap or photograph, as with my third example here, the cutest puppy in the entire world? The next question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the color of the fabric or the substrate that we are applying the transfer? Now, when it comes to defining a color of a fabric, I usually go by 4 color definitions: white or neutral, light or pastel, bright or fluorescent, or dark. So based on those 4 criteria, we're going to use those to determine which paper we are going to pick for a particular job. The last question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the material content of the fabric or substrate that we intend to decorate? What we've got to understand is that transfer paper, unlike a sublimation process where you have one paper that's essentially designed to apply your design to everything, transfer papers are designed for particular fabrics or substrates based on material content. So you're going to have papers that are designed for 100% cotton. You're going to have papers that are designed for cotton and polyester blends. You're going to have papers designed for 100% polyester or other synthetic fabrics. And then there are the other materials that are out there, such as your hard substrates, your ceramics, your metals, your glasses or acrylic, and then you also have other natural products such as leather. What we've got to understand is there are specific papers designed to image these particular substrates. So it's not going to be one uniform paper that works on everything. We have to pick the paper based on the particular job. So let's go ahead and get started by, diagramming and diagnosing these papers. And we're going to start with the family of inkjet printers. Now, you might be using a desktop printer like an Epson. You might be using a wide format printer such as a Muto or Mamaki, or maybe a printer that's running a specialized ink like a solvent ink for outdoor signage applications. We're also going to cover papers that are compatible with your sublimation printers, mainly your Sawgrass Virtuoso units, your Ricoh gel sprinters, and then other micro piezo print head printers that are employing sublimation inks. Now, as far as the type of ink that is available on the market, what you're basically going to discover is that you have 5 basic families of inks out there. You have dye inks, you have Eco-Solvent Inks, Pigment Inks, Solvent Inks, and Sublimation Inks. So let's go ahead and discuss these particular inks so that we know which particular paper to pick based on the ink that we're using. When it comes to dye inks are going to be the most common ink in the inkjet world. A Hewlett-Packard, an Epson, a Fuji, or a Canon, odds are it is running a dye ink. This is a water ink with dyes added. Main point of using a dye-based ink is that the ink is generally inexpensive and they deliver very bright colors. But what we also got to understand is, because it is a relatively inexpensive ink, you might have issues regarding fading, especially when you apply your transfer and you start washing and drying that image on the garment over the normal course of time. Now, here we have a list of all the transfer papers on the market from major manufacturers that are compatible with dye inks. As a note on this particular screen, I want to point out a couple of papers from World Paper, what they call their purple line and their yellow line. These particular papers were the very first inkjet transfer papers to hit the market. Now, they are designed specifically to work with dye inks. So if you're using a dye ink and you're using one of these first generation papers, you are going to get a very good result. As far as the other papers on the list are meant to be cross-compatible, so to speak. They may work with a number of different inks. But if you are using a dye-based system, the purple line and paper work very well with dye-based inks. Next, let's move to a pigment ink. Now, a pigment ink is actually a solid particle that is contained in a liquid form. So in other words, the liquid is acting as a carrier for the solid particle, very similar to a sublimation ink. The only thing is a pigment ink isn't going to change from a solid to a gas when exposed to heat. A pigment ink will stay a solid. It's the liquid carrier that evaporates usually when we apply heat. Now, in regard to pigment inks, I have a couple of papers on this list highlighted. One is the Neenah Jet Pro Activewear. Neenah Jet Pro Activewear is specifically designed to apply to your polyester fabric materials, mainly your microfiber polyester materials. The unique factor of Jet Pro Activewear is when you apply to a microfiber polyester, the emulsion layer will allow heat and moisture to evaporate through that particular emulsion layer. So in other words, you still carry the same properties of moisture wicking that you normally associate with microfiber polyesters. The emulsion layer of Jet Pro Activewear is not going to upset that. Another paper I'd like to feature on this list is made by Stahls, which they call Intra-Opaque Stretch. What is unique about this particular product is it is a very flexible opaque material. Now, opaque materials do a better job of trapping and suspending pigment inks. And this particular one is nice because not only are you going to get that color vibrancy, but the graphic will actually stretch with the material if there is that need. Usually whenever you're talking about like a combed cotton material where you know the material is going to flex once the material or the fabric or the garment is put over the body, in this particular case you want an emulsion layer that is going to stretch. And as far as the Intra-Opaque Stretch from Stahls, it's a very good product for that. I would say if you're using the Stahls Intra-Opaque or if you're using the Neenah Jet Pro Activewear, while it may not be as durable as straight sublimation to 100% polyester, these two particular papers are going to hold up better for polyesters than most of the other papers listed here. So it's just something to bear in mind that if you are using an inkjet system and you want to decorate microfiber polyester, I recommend that you run a pigment ink through your inkjet, and I would definitely recommend these two particular papers for that purpose. Now, let's go to Eco-Solvent inks. As far as an Eco-Solvent ink, what we have to understand is, unlike the dye and pigment, where we're basically talking about a water-based carrier, Eco-Solvents are using an oil-based carrier. And unfortunately, what tends to happen with a lot of Eco-Solvent units is when you try to run a inkjet t-shirt transfer paper through an Eco-Solvent unit, the inks have a difficult time sticking to the emulsion layer. Most inkjet transfer papers are made with a very absorbent emulsion layer. In other words, the ink is going to basically absorb into that emulsion and be suspended within that emulsion. But when it comes to an oil base, most of your inkjet t-shirt transfer papers on the market have a very difficult time absorbing an oil-based ink like an Eco-Solvent ink. So the usual symptom is when you try to print to these materials with an Eco-Solvent, the ink has a tendency to run off the page. In my research, about the only transfer papers that I found that were compatible with Eco-Solvent inks were the Neenah line of inkjet t-shirt transfer papers. One that I have highlighted here, the Neenah Image Clip for Inkjet, is a unique product in the fact that it is self-weeding and compatible. Another product that's on this list, which I didn't highlight, but I should, is the Nina Jet Pro Soft Stretch paper. I would say from my experience here at Conde, looking at sales of transfer paper over the past 8-9 years, Nina Jet Pro Soft Stretch is definitely our most popular inkjet t-shirt transfer paper. And the reason is because it is universally acceptable in regard to the type of inkjet systems that you can run the papers through. Not only is the Nina Jet Pro Soft Stretch and the other Nina papers, are they going to be compatible with your Eco-Solvent inks, but they're also going to be compatible with your solvent inks. Now, primarily speaking, solvent inks are used by sign makers, and the reason that they are used is because they are fade-proof, waterproof, and scratch resistant. So in regard to any type of outdoor application, it is the preferred ink to use. But again, a solvent ink is going to be an oil-based ink similar to the Eco-Solvent. And then we're going to run into the same issue with most inkjet transfer papers, in the fact that if we try to run most inkjet transfer papers with the standard emulsion, tendency to run off the sheet. That's not going to be true with the Nina papers. Now, in regard to this list, you'll notice I have highlighted 3 opaque materials: Nina Jet Opaque, Nina Jet Opaque 2, and Nina 3G Jet Opaque. The 3G standing for third generation. These are very good opaque materials that are able to essentially trap and suspend the solvent inks. They do a much better job than the other inkjet papers on the market. So if you are a sign-making company and you want to get into producing t-shirt transfers, if you plan on using your sign-making printers and you're running solvent or Eco-Solvent inks, I highly recommend that you try out the Nina brand of inkjet transfer papers first. The next ink we're going to talk about is Sublimation Inks. Now, if you are a Conde Systems client, you are probably very familiar with the sublimation process. But essentially, when we're talking about a sublimation ink, we're talking about a solid particle within a liquid carrier that under heat and pressure, that solid particle is going to go from a solid to a gas without going through the liquid state, which is the chemical definition of sublimation. Now, up until recently, sublimating onto a material like 100% cotton was impossible. You may have heard David Gross speak about it on numerous occasions where you cannot sublimate to cotton. But recently, a company called Vivid Chemical developed a transfer paper called Reveal S. Now, Conde Systems is the exclusive distributor for Reveal S material, but this is a specialized film that is made with what is called a smart coating. And what this will do is it will trap and suspend those sublimation inks and take the ink and coating and fuse it to the surface of your cotton fiber. So it allows us to take these sublimation inks and trap and suspend them on the surface of a cotton. Very unique process. Another unique feature about the Reveal S film is that it is a self-weeding t-shirt transfer paper. And unlike some of the inkjet self-weeds, a second sheet is not required to make this work. As far as Reveal S is concerned, one thing that I would suggest is when you're using Reveal S film, you want to make sure that your heat press is calibrated accurately for the process, because working with Reveal S, the time, temperature, and pressure requirements are a bit more critical with Reveal S than they are with some of the other inkjet transfer papers on the market. So you want to make sure your heat press is calibrated. Now, we have a number of instructional videos on Conde TV on our YouTube channel that will go over the calibration process for Reveal S film. But what we have to say about this product is, technically speaking, it is the world's first single sheet, self-weeding, inkjet sublimation to cotton t-shirt transfer paper. Very unique product. So now, let's break down inkjet transfer papers based on the type of graphic that you would use, whether you're using line art or clip art designs, whether you're using vectorized designs, or bitmap photographs. When it comes to your clip art or line art, what you're going to find is that most inkjet transfer papers are going to be compatible with these types of file formats. There are a few self-weeding inkjet transfer papers on the market. Nina does have one called Image Clip for Inkjet. And of course, our Reveal S, manufactured by Vivid Chemical, is a self-weeding. A&W Specialty Papers also has a paper called AW Trans Clip, which is a self-weeding inkjet. Now, a couple of things to note in regard to the Nina and the AW transclip. They are going to require a second sheet in order to weed the emulsion off of the imaging sheet that you are feeding through your inkjet printer. With the Nina process, you have to have a monochrome laser printer. You have to print a negative of your original design using standard laser toner. Then at that point, you are going to take your negative and your printed image clip for inkjet sheet. You're going to line the two up carefully, place them inside of your heat press, and heat together. When you peel the bond sheet with the toner off of the image clip for inkjet, the toner is essentially going to bond to the emulsion and physically pull it off the page. That's how you're able to generate your self-weeding graphic. Now, while it sounds simple, it's actually a much more complicated process than what I've just described. Mainly what you have to do is make sure that you have your graphic aligned perfectly before you bring it down with your heat press. So understand that if you want to get involved with a Nina image clip for inkjet, my suggestion would be the first pack that you purchase, use that as your practice pack to learn the technique. In regards to the papers that are on this list, one thing I would also like to point out is our Conde jet imprints. While it may not be a self-weeding paper, it is a cold peel inkjet t-shirt transfer paper. By being cold peel, what this will allow us to do, if we choose, we can take our print and put it inside of a vinyl cutter and use the vinyl cutter to trim away the excess emulsion that we can physically remove off the sheet before we take that transfer and apply it to a garment. Now, if you attempt to do this, what you have to understand is when you're using your vinyl cutter, you want to use a standard 45-degree blade, and you want to set the cutting speed very slow, because if we go too fast, the blade may have a tendency to skip over the emulsion layer and not make a clean cut. Another note, if you attempt to use jet imprints with a cutter, make sure you do not cut through the backing sheet, but it can be done, and if you do, it makes a very beautiful design. When it comes to vector arts, these are going to be computer-generated graphics, and you will notice here that we have, again, our self-weeding papers that are highlighted, but the papers that are highlighted in red are papers that can be used in an optical or vinyl cutter. Now, understand that there is going to be some experimentation required in regard to setting your gram force and your cutting speed to operate these papers inside of a vinyl cutter. Generally speaking, what you will find is that these papers are going to cut somewhere between 90 to 120 gram force. Again, you want to use a standard 45-degree blade, and as far as the cut speed is concerned, you can cut through opaque materials a little faster than you can cut through a cold peel paper like the Conde jet imprints or the Coastal Business Red Grid 2.0. But understand that these papers can be vinyl cut. Of course, you can also physically cut the paper with any kind of cutting tool, and we definitely recommend that you trim away the excess material before you apply your inkjet transfer to your garment. Now, for bitmaps for photographic reproductions, what you will see on this list are papers that are called solid film papers. In other words, the emulsion film is basically laid over the carrier sheet, or what we call the backing sheet, because the backing sheet allows that emulsion carrier to be fed through an inkjet printer. But when you apply the transfer, you are essentially applying a solid film. Where solid films come into play is because if we have an even, smooth film layer, it is going to do the best job at capturing the raster dot pattern generated by inkjet printers. So as far as these papers are concerned on this list, these are all going to be solid film single sheet transfers. Now, in my personal opinion, if you are doing photographic reproductions, inkjet printers are really the best printers for photographic reproductions because the dyes or pigment inks primarily used by most inkjet systems deliver very vibrant colors. Also, inkjet systems tend to lend themselves better to being portable systems. So let's say for the sake of argument you attend an event like the state high school volleyball tournament or the local rodeo or the state fair, and you're producing garments on demand. going with an inkjet printer is probably your best bet, especially if you're doing photographic reproductions at these events. Let's say you have a backdrop where you get people to stand and pose in front of. You snap their picture, you bring the picture into your system, and then you output to your printer to produce the transfer and ultimately produce the garment. You definitely want to go with an inkjet setup in that regard. In regard to laser printers do not like to travel. Laser print are going to be stationary units. So if you have any kind of portable operation, you definitely want to look at inkjet transfers and an inkjet system to deliver your graphics. Now let's talk about inkjets in regard to the color of the fabric or the substrate. For your white to neutral, and by neutral I'm meaning an off-white, and I'm also including ash gray in the white to neutral category. Ash gray would probably be as dark as you'd want to go in regard to using these papers. But here is a list of recommended papers if you are going to a white or off-white or neutral fabric or substrate. You'll notice here we've got our self-weeding papers listed, but then we have other papers listed from other distributors. Some of the good papers that are here, the Forever Inkjet Basic, very good paper, usually very consistent in their production quality because Forever is a German mill and Germans are always particular about their quality. Now, in regard to the self-weeding papers that are on here, self-weeding papers, generally speaking, are going to deliver a lighter hand or feel on your fabric than a traditional solid film transfer. But also what we've got to understand is usually when we're talking about a lighter hand, we also might be limiting the durability of that product. In other words, how many washes and dries that it can sustain. Generally speaking, when we're talking about inkjet transfers, the thicker hand or feel of that emulsion layer, the more durable that transfer is going to be once it's applied to the garment and then that garment goes through the washer and dryer. Just something to note. When it comes to your lighter colors or pastel colors, we definitely recommend going with your self-weeding papers for these applications. And the reason is that if you try to use a solid film emulsion transfer paper on a lighter color or a pastel, the excess emulsion, if you do not trim it away, will show through on the garment. And generally speaking, the more color there is in the garment, the more prominent that excess emulsion will show. So just remember, if you try to use one of your white or neutral transfer papers on a lighter color or pastel garment, make sure that you trim away that excess emulsion before you apply it. Also understand that since most of these emulsion layers are clear emulsion layers, the background color of the garment may have an effect on the image printed on the surface. So you might want to bear that in mind. My suggestion would be to print some basic color charts and apply them to some of these lighter colors so that you can see the effect of the color once it's applied to your lighter pastel to see if there is a color shift from the original color by going onto a lighter or pastel. Just a little piece of advice there. Now when it comes to your dark colors, what you're going to find is that a lot of these are going to have to be used with opaque materials. Whenever you are looking at a t-shirt transfer paper and it has the word opaque in the title, that should clue you in that this is a paper designed for dark garments. Now, among this list, you're going to find a number of choices from a number of different manufacturers. Now, most of these can be used with vinyl cutters in a print and cut application, but understand that some will lend themselves better to vinyl cutting than others. And the primary factor on this would be the elasticity of that opaque emulsion layer. If it's a fairly stiff emulsion layer, it's going to be very easy to cut with an optical or vinyl cutter. But if the emulsion layer is designed to flex, such as the Inktra Opaque Stretch or the Nina 3G Jet Opaque, you may have a more difficult time cutting these materials. Because of the flexibility, sometimes the cutting blade has a tendency to skip as opposed to making a clean cut line. So if you happen to use these particular papers in an optical or vinyl cutter, remember to slow down your cutting speed so that you can cut through these materials accurately. Now, let's break down inkjet t-shirt transfer papers in regard to material content. What you're going to discover with most inkjet t-shirt transfer papers, is that they were pretty much all designed to apply to 100% cotton garments. I would say the lone exception to that would be the Nina Jet Pro Activewear, which was specifically designed to apply to microfiber polyester. But just about every paper on this list that you see at the moment will apply to a 100% cotton garment. So as you can see, there are plenty of choices out there. So my advice would be contact the manufacturers or contact these distributors, get some samples and try them out. But like I said, you have at least you have options in regards to 100% cotton. Now, when we start talking about cotton polyester blends, we have to be careful in regards to opaque materials that we use. Most manufacturers are going to state that their opaque material can be applied to a cotton polyester blend. But what we have to understand is when we talk about a blend where you have a polyester content that's fairly high, we run the risk of a symptom that we call dye migration. Basically, what dye migration means is that the polyesters in your blend are dyed a particular color. When we lay an opaque material over and we apply heat and pressure, sometimes the heat and pressure may cause the dyes in the polyester to bleed out of the polyester fiber, and they are going to absorb into the opaque material. Generally, you will notice this because instead of the opaque being white after it's heated, it might be an off shade of white, usually matching the color of the garment. So in other words, if you apply a white opaque material on a black polyester blend and you heat, some of those dyes in that black polyester may bleed to your white material. If that happens, it's going to turn the white material a shade of gray. Now, once the material itself shifts color, all of the colors printed on the surface of the material may shift as well. So when it comes to opaque materials and your cotton polyester blends, my suggestion would be you would run a quick test to see if the material is going to dye migrate if you heat it to the garment. The simple test is to mainly cut a blank swatch, lay it over your cotton poly blend dark garment, and then heat the swatch at the recommended temperature and time. If the swatch does not shift in color, no dye migration is taking place, and that particular material should be safe. Now, if you do see a shift in color, it means that dyes are leaving the polyester and they are absorbing into that opaque material, which at that point I would recommend try another opaque material. So just bear that in mind whenever you are using these materials on cotton polyester blends. When it comes to 100% polyester or your other synthetic fabric materials, there are a couple of opaque materials where the manufacturer recommends or approves use onto 100% polyester. And the ones I would like to point out here are the ones made by Parapy, mainly the Parapy Inkjet Dark Premium. According to Parapy specifications, this material can be applied to 100% polyester without dye migration. Also, Stahl's has what they call their inkjet or intra-opaque and intra-opaque stretch. According to their specifications, they claim that it can apply to a 100% polyester. In my opinion, the best transfer paper for going on to polyesters is the Nina Jet Pro Activewear. So again, this is your list of t-shirt transfer papers that you can apply to a 100% polyester or synthetic material, but always test before you enter your production run. When it comes to hard substrates, what we've got to understand is if we're using an inkjet printer and we are absorbing and suspending a liquid ink, it's going to be very difficult to apply to a hard substrate. I really kind of burned up the internet, so to speak, looking for an inkjet transfer material that can technically apply to a hard substrate. The only one I was able to find was a Stahl's product that they call Intra Water Slide. Now, a water slide material would be able to work with an inkjet on a hard substrate because you are not using any type of heat to apply the water slide material. Now, I think it's pretty interesting that they can get a water slide to work with an inkjet product. So if you are looking to decorate hard substrates and all you have is an inkjet printer, you're probably going to have to contact stalls and get some of their water slide material and test. But like I said, of all the market research I'd done, this was the only inkjet paper that I saw that you could use to apply to a hard substrate. Generally speaking, most of us in the digital decorating industry tend to use sublimation when we are going on the hard substrates. And that is what I would still recommend, because sublimation inks are actually going to absorb into the polyester coatings on a lot of these design substrates where the ink itself is not actually on the surface but embedded within the coating. That's what makes a durable product. Understand that when we apply a water slide material on the surface, what we are making essentially is a decorative product, not a durable product. So understand that there will be some testing involved when it comes to using the Inktra water slide on hard substrates. But again, it's the only paper that I found that could possibly work. So now that we finished the section on inkjet t-shirt transfer papers, let's move on to color laser transfer papers. Now, what we've got to understand about color lasers are there are three basic categories of color laser printers. You have what you're called your oil-based color laser printers, you have non-oil color laser printers, and then you have the newer generation white toner printers. So let's go ahead and discuss the papers that are available for these three particular platforms. In this first slide here, we're going to cover t-shirt transfer papers that are designed for oil-based color laser printers. Now, what we have to understand about oil-based color laser printers are this was a technology employed by major printer manufacturers years ago, but all of these manufacturers are switching from an oil-based toner to a non-oil system. So essentially these papers are going to be for your legacy printers that are out there on the market, such as your Canon CLCs that use a component called fuser oil or an oil coating roller. Some of your older Lexmark systems like the C912 or the C920. Those use an oil to help the toner bond to the page. Some of your older Konica Minolta BizHub units are using oil-based. So if you have one of those units, these are the papers that are available for your oil-based color laser printer or color laser copier. But understand that these oil-based systems are essentially dying out and that manufacturers are switching to non-oil. So as far as this list is concerned, I will not expect this list to expand, so to speak, with other manufacturers coming out with new product offerings. What you're probably going to see over the next couple of years is that these papers are slowly going to disappear from the market, just like the oil-based systems are doing at the moment. But they are available if you happen to have an oil-based system, and here is the list. But let's move to the non-oil or LED papers. Now, non-oil printers and copiers is what's dominating the market at the moment. Essentially, instead of using an oil to help the toner bond to the page, they are using high amount of heat out of their fuser assemblies. So what a lot of major manufacturers had to do essentially is go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and make their emulsion layers tougher so that they could survive these high heat units. But since these particular units have been on the market for a while, and they are now the predominant engine in regards to digital decorating and transfer production, what you're going to find is that there is a long laundry list of transfer papers available for your non-oil or LED units. As you can see, this is page 1 of 2. When I jump to page 2 of 2, again, more manufacturers offering t-shirt transfer papers for your non-oil or LED color laser printers and copiers. This list here are papers that we recommend for the new generation of color laser printers called white toner color laser printers. On the market at the moment, the two major distributors of white toner printers is going to be Oki Data and another company called Uninet. Now, as far as these particular papers are concerned, these are the ones that we are recommending for these white toner systems. As far as these are concerned, all of these particular papers have been tested in these newer white toner systems and should be certified by the manufacturer. So definitely safe to feed these particular papers through your white toner system. Now, let's talk about the type of graphic and how we dictate color laser transfers based on the type of graphic. When it comes to your line art or clip art designs, you will notice that there's a variety of papers available. Now here, I've indicated which papers are self-weeding t-shirt transfer papers, which seem to be the predominant paper that is taking over the market, so to speak. The nice thing about a self-weeding transfer paper is that it gives you a screen printed effect, but basically done with a digital transfer. Now, in regard to self-weeding papers, some papers are going to be a single sheet application, meaning you taking a sheet, feeding it through the printer, and then applying the sheet directly to the fabric. The theory is that wherever you have printed toner, the emulsion from the sheet will release. Where you don't have printed toner, that excess emulsion should stay on the backing sheet as you peel. Now, other self-weeding papers are going to be two-part papers. In other words, you're going to get a separate imaging sheet, which feeds through your color laser printer, and a separate transfer sheet, which is going to apply emulsion over the printed toner. What you do is you take your printed imaging sheet and your transfer sheet, you put them together in a heat press, and use the heat press to set the emulsion over the printed toner. Now understand that a lot of these papers are going to require different times, different temperatures, and different pressures to set that emulsion to your printed toner. So here are the list of papers that we recommend for clip art and line art applications, and of course we have the self-weeding papers designated. On page 2, we have more papers listed from Stahl's, from Parapi, and World Paper. And again, the red arrows will indicate the ones that are self-weeding. Now, in regards to vectorized designs, again, a lot of the papers that are compatible with your line art or clip art designs are also going to be compatible with your vectorized designs. But when it comes to using a self-weeding paper, you're going to have much better success working with a vectorized design than you will a line art or a clip art design. And the reason is because a vectorized design is basically essentially using an equation to create a solid cut line, so to speak. So when we're using line art or clip art, what we might have is a very fuzzy edge to our graphic. Sometimes with bitmaps, even though we might be using a high resolution bitmap, if we zoom in, a bitmap may have a jagged edge to it. And whenever we have a jagged edge, we are not going to get a clean weed, so to speak. By using vectorized designs, we're always going to have clean lines, so to speak. So when it comes to self-weeding transfer paper, they really work best with your vectorized designs. Now here, you will notice that we have the self-weeding papers indicated, but also there are going to be some papers, just like with inkjets, that we can use with an optical cutter or a vinyl cutter, and that's mainly going to be the opaque materials on this list. Now, whenever we're using a cutter, since a vectorized design makes a clean line, so to speak, it's going to provide a clean cut line for your optical or vinyl cutter. So if you happen to be using a print and cut setup with a transfer paper, we definitely want to work with vectorized art formats. Now when it comes to bitmap or photographic reproduction, what we want to understand, just like with inkjets, we want to use a solid film transfer paper to essentially capture the dot pattern created by our laser printers to recreate our graphic. Now, in regards to using bitmaps or photographs for reproduction onto garments or hard substrate materials, what we have to understand is the initial resolution of our bitmap as compared to the size of the paper that we are going to decorate. The general rule I like to use is if I have a bitmap at a certain resolution and I double the size of that bitmap, I am going to cut my resolution in half. So the rule that I like to use is whenever I size a bitmap for my transfer paper, after that bitmap is sized, that bitmap should be between 150 to 300 dpi image resolution. Below 150 dpi, you may not be able to deliver the photographic quality. In other words, the graphic becomes a little fuzzier, a little hazier. Above 300 dpi, in my opinion, is really kind of overkill. Even though laser printers are capable of going up to 600 or 1200 dpi, 300 dpi for a garment is adequate. Remember, we're not going onto a flat reflective surface like a piece of metal. We're going onto a t-shirt, and a t-shirt is only going to hold so much resolution anyway. So when you're working with your bitmaps or you're working with your photographic reproductions, make sure that by the time you scale your graphic to fit the paper, that your graphic is somewhere between 150 to 300 dpi image resolution. Now, let's talk about color laser printers or color laser transfer papers in regard to the color of the fabric of the substrate. When we're talking about papers designed to image your white, neutral, off-white, and ash gray, these papers are going to be not only for your non-oil machines, but for your white toner printing machines. If we're going on to a white or a neutral and we don't necessarily need white generated from our white toner printers, we do have the ability to turn the white off. So in other words, we can use our white toner printers to decorate white and light color materials just as easy as we can use to decorate darker materials. But what you're going to find here on this list is I have a few papers highlighted in red. And the reason I have these particular papers highlighted is because some laser printers are going to use what are called Canon print engines. Besides your Canon units, mainly your Hewlett-Packards. And what you're going to find is these particular print engines have a tendency to run a little hotter in the fuser assembly than most of your other print engines on the market. So you have to be careful whenever you're feeding a transfer paper through a unit like a Hewlett-Packard or a Canon. If you do have one of those units and your engine tends to run a little hotter, your fuser assembly tends to get a little hotter in order to properly bond the toner to the page, then you might want to try the highlighted papers on this list because they are going to be better suited to run through those hotter print engines like your Hewlett-Packards. Now, technically speaking, Hewlett-Packard does not guarantee or warranty transfer paper use in their particular machines. So make sure that when you get samples of these to test in your Hewlett-Packard, test 1 or 2 sheets at a time to make sure there are going to be no feed issues. If 1 or 2 sheets are able to run through your unit successfully, then you can try stacking more sheets into the tray and see if you can employ larger production runs when it comes to the paper. But understand that some papers are going to operate better in these hotter print engines than others, and these are the ones that I recommend. Now, as far as your lighter or pastel colors, what we want to bear in mind here is that generally speaking, we want to use a paper with a very thin or very light emulsion layer. Again, the more color that's in the material, the more prominent excess emulsion will show if we apply it directly to the garment. So while all of these papers technically can be used with your lighter materials, most of them you're definitely going to want to trim away the excess material before you apply. But if you're in a heavy production setting, you may not necessarily have the time to trim transfers before you apply them, then basically you want to go with a transfer with a very light emulsion layer so that that excess window doesn't show up as prominently as some of the other papers. The papers I have highlighted on this list, the Conde LaserFlex CL, the Forever Classic Universal, the Pro World Laser Soft Easy Peel, and the Parapy CL135 are probably going to be your lightest emulsion layer transfer papers on the market, or at least the ones that I have tested personally. So if you are going onto a lighter color and you're going to apply the whole design or the whole sheet, then I would probably start with these papers first to see if you can reduce that shadow or window created by some of the solid film transfers on this list. Now, in regards to bright colors, if we have a non-oil printer, here is your list of transfer papers that I would recommend for your brighter colors. Now what you're going to see here is that most of the papers on this list are going to be opaque materials that are designed primarily to go to dark colors or dark fabrics. Now, some, like the Image Clip Laser Light and the CL Trim Freeze, those particular papers, while they can be applied to brighter colors, the general rule that I tend to use is that your graphic needs to be darker than the shirt color you're going to. If it is, you can use one of these self-weeding papers for whiter lights and get away with the design, so to speak. But if any area of your graphic is lighter than the material that you're going to, you're probably not going to be able to use a self-weeding paper for whites or lights. You're going to have to go with an opaque material or a self-weeding paper for dark garments. Now, when we're talking about self-weeding papers for dark garments, and we are running through a traditional 4-color process printer, another thing that we have to bear in mind is that we are not going to be able to capture every color in the RGB, CMYK, or Pantone color scale when we're using a traditional 4-color process printer and a self-weeding paper for dark garments. And the reason is because when the printer puts down the toner to represent that particular color, the emulsion layer that we are applying over the top is feeling for that toner layer. Where the emulsion comes in direct contact with the toner, the emulsion is going to stick. However, if that emulsion sheet comes in contact with the imaging sheet, usually with most papers, they put a chemical blocker in the imaging sheet to keep the emulsion in the transfer sheet from sticking. And the problem that we're going to run into is that whenever we're talking about a light concentration color, for example, a baby blue, a faded pink, a light gray, generally what traditional 4-color printers tend to do to create these colors is they're using your basic toners, but they are spreading the dot pattern out, so to speak, putting gaps, wider gaps in between the dots and using the background color of the paper to trick the eye, so to speak, to generate this light color. Well, if we have a light concentration of toner and we lay the emulsion sheet over our on top of our self-weeding imaging sheet, sometimes if the color is a light enough concentration, the emulsion sheet can't tell or can't differentiate the toner layer from the sheet itself. Generally speaking, the emulsion doesn't stick and these colors tend to drop out when you try to apply them to your garment. So remember, if you're using a traditional 4-color color laser printer and you're using these self-weeding papers, you want to design your artwork with bright, bold colors. What you have to be careful of are gradients and halftones in these lighter color concentrations. Understand that they may not work. Now, if you switch platforms from a traditional 4-color process printer to a white toner printer, essentially what the white toner printer does is it fills in those gaps of color with white toner dots. So no matter what color concentration you are using, you are always going to have a consistent toner layer. That's why white toner weeding papers, you can capture any color in the RGB, CMYK, or Pantone color scale. You can work with gradients and halftones. You can even do photographic reproductions with self-weeding transfer papers, which is usually not recommended unless you happen to have a white toner printer. So the nice benefit of having a white toner printer is, graphically speaking, you can do whatever you want and still employ a self-weeding transfer paper. So essentially you're getting the best of both worlds. Now let's talk about dark color t-shirt transfers for your color laser printers. Here's the list that I have compiled here from the major manufacturers. Again, we want to be careful whenever we are using dark color materials, opaque materials, through these traditional non-oil machines. Generally speaking, your opaque materials are going to be thicker than your typical t-shirt transfer. Now, what we have to do in regards to color laser printers is we usually have to slow the printer down in order for the toner to properly bond to our opaque material. In other words, we slow the printer down so that the material has more time in the fuser assembly for the fuser assembly heat to properly bond the toner to the page. Now, generally speaking, when it comes to a laser printer, how we regulate the speed at which the material goes through the printer is by setting the media type or media weight. So what you're going to have to understand is when you're running an opaque material, you are probably going to have to select a thicker media weight than what you would running a traditional t-shirt transfer paper designed for a white or light color. In regards to dark color transfers through the white toner printer, these are the papers that we recommend. The Nina Laser Dark, the Nina Image Clip Concert T, the Forever Laser Dark No Cut, the Magic Touch Wow 7.8 Professional, the Parapy Trim Free Dark, and the Flip It 1.0 and 2.0 offered by Graphics One. All of these papers have been certified to operate in your white toner color laser printers. And as far as these materials are concerned, they're going to do a fantastic job for you. As I had mentioned, the great thing about having a white toner printer is when it comes to our artwork, we are not limited in the artwork that we do. We can still employ a self-weeding transfer paper, and depending on the material that we use, we can go to a 100% cotton, a cotton poly blend, even 100% polyesters. So bear in mind, here are a list for dark garment t-shirt transfers, most of them self-weeding, that are recommended for your white toner systems. Now, let's break these papers down based on material content. Again, we're talking about color laser t-shirt transfer papers here. For your 100% cotton, if you're running through a traditional 4-color non-oil, here is your list of papers. And as you can see, there are plenty of papers to choose from on the list. Now, some of these papers are going to be solid film transfers. Some of these papers will be single sheet self-weeding. Some of these papers will be 2-sheet self-weeding. But they all can be applied to 100% cotton garments. Again, more papers that can be applied to 100% cotton. Some are solid film, some are self-weeding. Now, generally speaking, if you contact most of these manufacturers, they should provide samples for you for testing purposes. I highly recommend that you do that. Now, let's talk about cotton and polyester blends. As you'll notice, I have some papers here that are highlighted. Generally speaking, your opaque materials. When we're using an opaque material on a cotton polyester blend, we have to be mindful of dye migration. Now, while the manufacturers suggest that these particular materials can be applied to cotton poly blends, again, my recommendation would be to test the material, to test the opaque material with your particular fabric by using a blank swatch and a heat press and following the application instructions to make sure your swatch doesn't shift in color. If your swatch shifts in color, you've got dye migration taking place and you want to select a different paper to use with your particular fabric material. But all of the papers that you see on this list will be compatible with non-oil traditional 4-color laser printers for decorating your cotton polyester blends. When it comes to the white toner printers, it's a little more limited list than what's available for your traditional 4-color process printers, but I anticipate this list expanding over the next couple of years. And the reason is because there is so much more that we can do graphically speaking with white toner systems. White toner systems are really starting to take over the market. They're really becoming the standard bearers, so to speak, of digital decorators for use with producing t-shirt transfers. So all of the papers that you see here will be recommended for cotton polyester blends through your white toner printer. But again, there are some papers that you want to test in case you do run into the dye migration symptom. Now, when it comes to 100% polyester or synthetic materials for your non-oil machines, you will notice here that all of the papers listed were recommended by the manufacturer for use with 100% polyester materials. I do highly recommend that you test these particular materials before you move into production. But from my personal experience, the one thing that I can attest is when it comes to the Forever papers, mainly the Forever Laser Dark, the Forever Laser Light, and the Forever Flex Soft material, those can easily be applied to 100% polyesters. And the reason that they work so well is because unlike most t-shirt transfer papers where you have a set temperature, Forever provides a temperature range to apply the material to your fabric or to your substrate. And usually the temperature is going to decrease as the amount of polyester increases within the fabric material. So for instance, with the Forever Laser Dark No Cut, if you are applying to 100% cotton, you're going to apply between 300 and 320 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you're going to a cotton poly blend, you're going to drop that temperature down to about 280 Fahrenheit. If you're going to 100% polyester, you could drop the temperature down to 260 degrees Fahrenheit. Material like polypropylene, you can get that temperature as low as 220 degrees and still apply the transfer to the substrate. Why is this so important? By lowering that application temperature, you eliminate the dye migration that could take place with your polyesters, because the dye migration is probably going to happen at a temperature above 300 to 320 degrees Fahrenheit. So if we can go below that temperature and still get the transfer to adhere to our material, we have a winner. And I can tell you from personal experience, the Forever papers will do that. Here is the list recommended for 100% polyester or synthetic materials when you are employing a white toner printer. Again, I just talked about the Forever papers. The Laser Dark, Laser Light, and Flex Soft are very easy to apply to 100% polyesters, and they're very consistent. As far as the other papers that are on this list, while they are recommended for 100% polyester or synthetic, again, let me stress, get a hold of some sample sheets and try them out on your polyester materials, looking for that dye migration symptom, and make sure that it is going to be suitable for your particular poly. Now, understand that when it comes to polyester materials, you're going to have different denier weights, which is basically the width of the thread used in polyester. So if you have very thin threads, odds are it's going to have a very low melt temperature, and in that case, you're probably going to have greater symptoms of dye migration. It's a heavier thinner, odds are it's going to be able to hold those dyes within the thread and not release them unless you're talking about a really high heat application. Now, let's talk about transfer papers for hard substrates. Now, one thing I want to bear in mind is I am throwing one kind of off-the-wall product into the category of hard substrates, and that is leather. And what can make leather so difficult to decorate, even though it is real popular to decorate, what can make leather difficult is you have your natural leathers, you also have your synthetic leathers. You're going to have different shades, different thicknesses. In other words, you know, no two leathers are the same. So in a way, it kind of becomes like a hard substrate, trying to find a paper that is going to work consistently. Now, my recommendation for decorating leather would be our Laser Imprints Hard Surface 1, which I think is a great product for decorating leather. The Magic Touch CPM transfer paper, even though the CPM stands for ceramics, plastics, and metal, it also does a bang-up job of decorating leather. The new Parapy product that they call CL Leather and Wood is also a very good product for decorating your leather. Now, some other interesting papers that are on the cover, which again is a paper made in Germany, they are coming out with new foil release papers for hard substrates that they call their Multitrans Gold and Silver. They have another product that's called Multitrans Select, but Multitrans Select is primarily designed to decorate other paper products. But the Multitrans Gold and Silver is going to be a single sheet transfer where the sheet is already decorated a gold or a silver. You essentially print your black toner of your design onto the sheet, and the sheet is going to combine the foil with the black toner under heat and pressure of the press and release it onto your hard substrate. What I like about this particular product is when it comes to decorating fabric materials, of course, if we were using a self-weeding paper, we can come over our design with a foil and we can add a foil effect to our transfer and increase the value of that particular garment that we're decorating. While foils have always worked with your fabric, it was very difficult to try to foil a hard substrate. But with this new Forever product, essentially the foil is built into the self-weeding transfer. So now you can take a silver or gold, come up with a design, and use that to decorate your hard substrates. This product should be coming to market very soon. We're in the process of testing it here at Conde Systems, but it's an interesting product that's coming to market, and I went ahead and put it on the list just so you had the heads up. Now, other materials that we can use for hard substrates are what are known as water slide materials. And here on this list, I do have a few water slide papers highlighted. And the reason I wanted to discuss water slide papers is because when it comes to hard substrates, there are going to be some substrates that simply put, we cannot put within a heat press. Maybe it's a three-dimensional object. Maybe it's a material that cannot withstand the heat generated from the heat press. Well, how do we decorate these particular materials? We use a water slide transfer. Now, if you've ever done a model airplane as a kid and you took the decal and put it in water, it's the same principle here with these water slide papers. So the nice thing is that there are a variety of water slide papers on the market now, and we can use these papers to decorate these non-traditional products. Some examples I like to talk about are using water slides to decorate candles. If you've ever seen a candle in a gift shop with a digital image printed to it, it's a water slide over that particular candle. You can even use water slide papers to decorate things like soap, which I think is pretty interesting. So as far as the water slide is concerned, remember, if it can't go inside of a heat press, it doesn't necessarily mean you cannot decorate it. You can with a water slide material. So now that we've covered t-shirt transfer papers for your color laser printers, let's move into transfer papers for color laser copiers. Now what you're going to discover is that most of these papers are going to be the same. But what we have to understand is if we're using a color laser copier, generally what we're using is a high-speed device. The main difference between using a laser printer and the laser copier is the output speed of the device. Most laser printers on the market at the moment are probably printing high-end at about 30 to 35 pages per minute. Whereas with a color laser copier, you have units that are out there that can produce as many as 80 to 90 pages per minute in full color. That is extremely fast. Also, when it comes to color laser copiers, they tend to be a bit more expensive than your color laser printer. So we got to be mindful of the transfer paper that we feed through color laser copiers. In other words, we got to bear in mind the speed of our copier and also the fact that if we are using a very high-end copier, we want to make sure that we run the safer paper that we can through that device to ensure that nothing goes wrong. Get into these copiers. Now, there are still oil-based copiers out there on the market. Like I said, they tend to be some of your older model Canon CLCs and some of your older model Konica Minolta Biz Hubs. If you happen to have one of those units and you want to produce t-shirt transfers, here is your list of compatible papers. Now, three that I would like to point out are Conde Laser Imprint CL, paper made by Airwaves called 597 Elite, and then a paper made by Parapi called their CL100. The reason I'm featuring these particular papers are back in the day when oil-based copiers and printers were prevalent, these particular papers deliver the thinnest emulsion layer that you can really get in a transfer paper. And if you have a very thin emulsion layer, you're going to have a very soft hand. In my opinion, using these particular papers in an oil-based copier is probably going to generate the softest transfer you could possibly produce outside of Nina Image Clip Laser Light. But as far as these units are concerned, like I said, they're kind of a dying breed. They are more expensive to manufacture than your non-oil machines. So a lot of the copiers that are out there in the market are basically going to be non-oil copiers. If you happen to use a print service like a Kinko's or a local print shop to produce your transfers, what you definitely want to understand is the printing equipment that they are using. If they happen to have an oil-based color copier, boy, are you going to be in luck, because you're going to produce some beautiful, very soft transfers with these particular papers that I've highlighted here. But this is your general list of papers that are compatible for your oil-based color copiers. Now there is another brand of color copier on the market that they call a wax toner color laser copier. If you've ever seen a wax toner color laser copier, when you load the color into the printer, it looks like a big giant crayon that you are literally sliding inside of the printer. But what the printer is doing is melting that wax, and the melted wax is bonded to the sheet. What this does is it produces a very beautiful, very vibrant design. But these particular color laser copiers use so much heat to melt that wax onto the sheet. Generally speaking, we do not recommend t-shirt transfer papers through any water color laser copier. In my research, the only two papers that I was able to find that would be compatible with these particular units is a paper offered by World Paper that they call their brown line. Now this is going to be for your white or lighter color fabric materials, and a paper made by Stahls that they call their Ultimate Print Light Laser. In other words, I could not find a dark garment transfer that would be compatible with these particular wax toner color laser copiers. They're very rare on the market. You know, they're mainly for presentation graphics, but make sure, other than these two papers, you do not feed a transfer paper through one of those units. It will get messy. But here, let's talk about the non-oil or LED color copiers and the compatible papers. Again, your non-oil is what's more prevalent in the market now because it's just simply less expensive for these major manufacturers to produce. So if you have a CLC, let's say, that is above a CLC 500 or 550, or you have a newer generation Konica Minolta BizHub, or you have a Canon or a Xerox, or a Fuji, any of those other brands on the market now, odds are they're going to be non-oil machines. An easy way to tell if you were working with a non-oil color laser copier is the print speed of the copier. If it's printing at less than 30 pages per minute, it is probably an oil-based machine. But any copier that is running above 30 pages per minute, it is probably going to be a non-oil machine. And here you see the list of compatible t-shirt transfer papers for these non-oil or LED color copiers. We do have 2 pages listed. This is our first page here, and here is our second page of compatible papers. One thing that I want to point on this list when it comes to the Parapy, you will notice some of these Parapy papers: CL120, CL135, CL145. What do these number designations mean? That is the gram per square meter weight of that particular paper. When it comes to a lot of color laser copiers, they can be programmed to run a particular gram per square meter media weight. So the nice thing about Parapy is they are giving you 3 or 4 different weight options that you can run through these high-speed units. My suggestion would be, as you start to get into a faster and faster machine, you want to go with a lighter weight t-shirt transfer. Because remember, as we are going through our laser printer, or our laser copier, pardon me, and we're running these sheets through 50, 60 pages per minute, what we want to make sure is that we are using a lighter paper that, given the speed of the copier, a lighter paper is going to have an easier time getting up to heat when it's in the fuser assembly so that the toner properly bonds to the page. So the nice thing about the Parapy line is they do give you different weight options depending on your particular color laser copier. So it's an easy match as far as finding the right paper weight for your particular copier. I think it's a nice feature. Now, let's break down color laser copier transfer papers based on the type of graphic. Here we have our list of clip art and line art approved color laser transfers. Now, a few things I want to point out on this list is that some of the papers on this list were designed for what I would call a single application process. In other words, most transfer papers can go to cotton or cotton poly blends, or they can go to white or light color fabrics, but some papers are designed with a specific purpose in mind. One here on the list, Image Clip Concert T. What we have to understand is that color copiers that are on the market are not going to print with white toner. So how can we generate a white graphic and apply it to a light color, bright color, or dark garment? Well, what Image Clip does is it takes a single color design, and when you lay the emulsion sheet over, it's going to lay a white base over that single color design so that we can generate a white graphic to a dark garment. That's all Image Clip Concert T does, but it does a great job of it. Another self-weeding product that will deliver a single color is the new line of Forever Flex Soft materials. Basically what Flex Soft is, it's a self-weeding vinyl material. So in other words, like your self-weeding papers, we can remove the excess material from our design by doing a imaging sheet and a transfer sheet together in our heat press to do the weed step. Now what we've got to understand about the Flex Soft is even though we are printing a single color graphic, whatever color Flex Soft sheet we send through the printer or the copier, ultimately that's what the design is going to be. So if you're running the metallic gold Flex Soft material and you weed it and transfer it, your image is going to be gold. If you run the red material through and you weed and transfer, your image is going to be red. So in other words, the image is going to be the color sheet that you send through, but you're printing with a single color design, and the single color design is just acting as the target so that you can lay your emulsion sheet over and weed the design. But the Flex Soft is a unique application. Now compared to the old days of printing and cutting and picking and weeding vinyl, I think it's pretty slick. You might want to give it a try. Another unique product, Magic Touch, has a temporary tattoo paper. Now their temporary tattoo paper, they do not recommend for color laser printers, but they do recommend it for color laser copiers, which is why it's on the list. Now, me personally, I cannot validate for the safety of the toner being used when you are applying to a temporary tattoo, and that is going against the skin. The only advice I can give you in that regard is to contact the actual manufacturer to see if they can provide any type of material safety data information in regards to the toners that they're using. But I think it's a pretty neat product, being able to create a temporary tattoo with a color laser copier. Some of the other single application transfer papers on there, the Parapy leather / wood. Now, I do realize that's 2 applications, not 1, but sometimes with presentations you got to hedge a little. But as far as the Parapy CL is concerned, again, designed for a specific purpose, either to image leather or to image wood, but it does a really cool job. Another unique paper that's offered by Stalls is what they call their cube print. This is printing onto note cubes. Now, while I think it's a neat feature, what you do have to find is a particular holder for your note cubes that you can fit inside of your heat press. I know back in the day, George Knight, when it came to their heat presses, what they called their digital combo press, they had a cube attachment that you could purchase so where you could decorate note cubes. So it's nice to see that the note cube printing is coming back with the Stalls cube print. I think that's pretty cool. When it comes to your vector art designs, again, we have your single sheet solid film transfers, and we also have some of the self-weeding transfers. Now, as far as the papers that I have highlighted on this list, the Nina Image Clip Laser Light, the AW Soft Laser Light, and the Magic Touch ORD 8.1 series, particularly designed to image glass. The reason I have these papers highlighted is because these papers leave what I would consider the minimal amount of residue from a transfer paper. So in other words, the emulsion layer is going to be very light, very clear. You're not even going to notice it if you do the process correct. So in regard to production value, these are definitely some papers to consider, especially the Magic Touch glass option. If you've ever tried to put a hard surface paper onto a glass or acrylic, sometimes the emulsion residue kind of creates an effect where you get like a haze look over your design. But I like the Magic Touch paper for glass. It leaves a very clean emulsion. Again, when we're talking about vector art designs in the Parapi paper, and I'd like to bring this up again, the Parapi papers are designated by grams per square meter weight, what they call GSM. So if you're using a color laser copier to produce your transfers, you're going to have a variety of different papers where you can basically set the grams per square meter weight for your paper, and you know that as far as being able to run through the copier, you're going to run through the copier clean. When it comes to bitmap or photographic reproductions, again, if we're talking about color laser copiers, we want to use a single sheet solid film transfer. And these are going to be the compatible transfers that are solid film for use with bitmaps or photographic reproductions. Now bear in mind the point I brought up earlier in the presentation, which is you want to make sure that by the time you scale or size your bitmap and you are ready to print, that bitmap is between 150 to 300 dpi image resolution. If you're able to do that, you're going to get a very good looking transfer, and laser copiers, just like laser printers, can deliver almost photo quality. So make sure you bear that in mind when you're working with bitmaps or photographic reproductions. Let's talk about the color of the fabric or the substrate. Here are the transfer papers for your whites to neutrals. Now, when you're using a color laser copier to produce your transfers, I am under the assumption that you are essentially producing transfers in volume. So the papers that I have listed here, the Airwaves Elite Plus, their 607 line, the Forever 5-Star Universal, what Stahls calls Ultimate Print, and what World Paper calls Redline. As far as these papers are concerned, they're going to have the fastest application time to get the emulsion layer to set to your fabric material. Generally speaking, you can apply these papers in under 15 seconds as far as heating the emulsion down. So if you're in a real high volume production setting using a color laser copier and you want to make sure it's as fast as you possibly can, you might want to start out with one of the papers on this list. As far as your light or as far as your light color or your pastel papers, the ones I recommend, Nina Image Clip Laser Light, Laser Soft Easy Peel, and the Parapi CL120 and the new Stahls Evolution Print. And the reason I want to recommend these is, again, they're going to leave a very light emulsion window. And if we have any excess emulsion and that emulsion is light, it's not going to discolor the garment as much as if you go with a heavier hand or heavier based emulsion. So make sure you understand that whenever you are selecting your particular paper. As far as papers compatible for color laser copiers for your brighter colors, again, when you're looking at this list, what you're going to notice is that we're shifting to more of an opaque material. But again, the rule is that you want to make sure that your design is darker than the shirt color if you're going to use a transfer paper for a white, neutral, or pastel design. If any part of your design is lighter than the shirt color that you're going to, you want to stick with an opaque material. Also understand that since most color laser copiers are not going to have the ability to create, is there any way that we can generate white and color within the graphic if we're using a copier? Your best bet is going to be a product made by Magic Touch, what they call their WOW 7.1 Professional. This actually has the white base built into the paper itself, but it is a 3-step process in order to go from print to finished design on the garment. You can go to Magic Touch's website and they've got that information detailed, but understand that there is a product out there where you've got white base built in and it can self-weed, and it's offered through Magic Touch. When it comes to dark garments, generating graphics for dark garments using a color laser copier, these are the papers that I recommend. Forever has a product that they call Laser Dark, which is very good at running through high-speed color laser copiers. It is going to be a thinner emulsion than most of your traditional opaque materials, so it tends to work better in these high-speed units. Another good product is the Parapy CL Dark Premium. What's nice about the Dark Premium is we can run through these high-speed copiers, and also we can apply to 100% polyesters with little or no dye migration. So another good paper to consider. All of these papers are also going to work with vinyl cutters, but understand it might take some experimentation with the gram force and the speed in order to get consistent cutting. If you're going to use an optical cutter, make sure you do not cut through the backing sheet. When it comes to material content, 100% cotton, just about any of these papers can apply to 100% cotton. I understand this is a big list of papers. My personal theory, what I like, is the Technoprint EZP. What I love about Technoprint EZP is it is a fairly universal color laser transfer paper. It can go through an oil-based color laser, it can go through a non-oil base, it can go through your high-speed color copiers, it can go through printers that have your hotter printer engines like your Canons or your HPs. In other words, it's such a universal paper. My little catchphrase that I came up with is, when in doubt, send Technoprint out. In other words, if we're having a difficult time to determine exactly what kind of printer or copier they're using, what the application is, you know, if we have to take just our best stab at the dark as far as what paper we recommend, usually the first one we recommend is Technoprint EZP. Like I said, a fairly universal paper for your laser printer platforms that are out there in the market. When it comes to cotton polyester blends, most of the materials that we listed for 100% cotton will also go to a cotton poly blend. The designation line, or the Mendoza line, that I would use as far as a cotton poly blend is once you get up to about a 50-50 blend. Once you get beyond 50% polyester within that particular material that you're going to, you do have to definitely be mindful of dye migration and understand that some of these papers may not work as well. One thing that you can tell whenever you're going on to a high polyester content with a transfer is, does the backing sheet have a tendency to stick to the material when you try to remove the backing sheet after heating? If you're able to peel away the backing sheet clean, the better it's going to be on a cotton poly blend. If the backing sheet has a tendency to stick as you're trying to peel it, it's the polyester that's causing it to stick. So if you run into that symptom, you might want to experiment with another paper. But if you're able to peel it clean, it's a good paper to use with your particular poly blend garment. When it comes to 100% polyester or synthetic, here's the list that we have available. Again, according to the manufacturer, all of these papers can be applied to 100% polyesters. What we got to be mindful of is the application temperature. Usually the higher the application temperature, the more we run the risk of that dye migration. When it comes to hard substrates, these are the papers that can run through your color copiers in order to decorate hard substrates. Some of the papers that I have featured on this list: the Neenah Technoprint HS, which stands for hard surface, brand new product; the Forever Multitrans, which has been on the market for a number of years; the Go Flip It 1.0 hard surface offered by Graphics One; and the Stahl's Promo Print. These papers were designed to be universal hard substrate transfer papers. In other words, being able to go onto metal, plastic, ceramic, wood, glass, acrylic, you name it. Now, where you might need to experiment is if you're dealing with a coated or an uncoated hard substrate. Some papers have a tendency to work better with coating. Some papers work better if the product is uncoated. You may have to do a little bit of experimentation. But one nice thing about using a hard substrate paper is if we put the design down onto our hard substrate, and let's say we make a mistake, the paper doesn't adhere properly, you know, let's say we get our artwork and we realize we put the wrong date of the event, something I have been guilty of from time to time. Nice thing about using a hard substrate paper is we can take acetone in a cloth and generally wipe the design right off the hard substrate. So while we might be out the transfer, we can still use that same substrate, print up another transfer, and keep going with the process until we get it right. Okay, so now we're coming to the end of the presentation. Before I go, I would like to give you my 4 survival tips for picking out and using a t-shirt transfer paper. Tip number 1, when it comes to transfer paper, always have a backup plan. One thing you might notice here at Conde Systems is that we carry multiple papers that essentially do the same job. The reason that we do that is because when we're talking about manufacturing paper, every now and then, once in a blue moon, a manufacturer will have a bad production run of paper. We're talking about a natural product, and it's not a question of if, it's more a matter of when. Think of it as inevitability. So we offer a variety of products that do a similar job so that you can have a backup plan. If there is a production issue with one particular paper, you've got a backup paper that you can use for your printing purposes. So always make sure to have a backup paper for the paper that you like to use. Test your inks and toners. What I mean by this is that not every inkjet or color laser on the market is really going to be suitable to use with a t-shirt transfer. If you have one of these units in your shop and you want to figure out, does my inkjet or my color laser, is it going to work with t-shirt transfers? Here's a simple test that you can perform. Take a graphic and print out 2 copies of that graphic on the 20-pound or 28-pound bond paper. Take one of those prints, cover it with a silicone or Teflon sheet, some type of protective sheet, put it inside your heat press and heat it at 375 degrees for 30 seconds. When you remove the sheet of paper, compare it to your second print to see if there is a color shift. If there is no color shift, then you have a heat-stable ink or toner, and it's going to work great with your t-shirt transfers. If you notice a dramatic color shift after you have heated your bond paper, odds are you want to use a different platform when you're producing your color transfers. Tip number 3, proper procedure tends to lead to proper performance. This is my polite way of saying follow the instructions for transfers. Now, those of you who might be familiar with sublimation, when you're sublimating a particular product, while the time may vary and the pressure may vary, generally speaking, you are sublimating at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. What you're going to discover when it comes to working with t-shirt transfer papers is that each paper has its own unique time, temperature, and pressure setting in order to achieve the best results. Never assume that the instructions for one paper are universal for all papers. Always make sure that you study the instructions before you get started and follow the instructions for that particular paper. Tip number 4, constant laundry. Now, what I mean by this is that since we're working with t-shirt transfer papers, sometimes over the course of production run to production run, the specs of the papers have a tendency to change slightly. You know, in other words, it's difficult to impossible to, let's say, get this run of Neenah Technoprint EZP to match the last production run of Neenah Technoprint EZP. Now, because paper is always going to have some variance, it may affect the ability of the image to stand up, let's say, during the washing drying process. So if you are using a t-shirt transfer paper, what you want to get in the habit of is every couple of months of test shirts, putting them through your own washer and dryer. So, you know, here at Conde, our benchmark is 25 hot washes and hot dries. If a paper can survive that, then it's a good paper. If it can't survive that, then you might want to go with a different product. But bear in mind, because paper is a natural product and, you know, through production, you got some slight variances, you want to stay on top of the issue, so to speak, by constantly doing wash tests your particular transfer paper. That way, if there's any variance that's going to cause a problem, you are going to see it before your client sees. Okay, so we have come to the end of our presentation here. I hope that everyone who attended at least was able to learn some new things about t-shirt transfer papers that they did not know in the beginning. Like I said, this was an educational presentation, wasn't meant to be a sales pitch, just trying to keep you informed. As far as the winners are concerned, let's discuss what we're going to do with the winners. Here at Conde Systems, we are having our 25th anniversary as a company. So what we are going to do is we are going to pick 25 attendees from this webinar, and we are going to award you a $25 Conde credit that you could use on your next purchase in celebration of our 25th anniversary. So we're going to take the attendee list and we're going to pick 25 winners at random. Hopefully you are going to get contacted to let you know that you have a Conde credit just for attending this webinar. Our way of saying thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to tune into our webinar, especially if you are a golf fanatic like I am and you are tuning into this webinar and missing a certain event that's going on in Augusta, Georgia. If that was the case, let me reach out to specifically thank you and bless you with nothing but fairways and greens in the future. Now, if you have one more question to ask or numerous questions, remember, go ahead and type in your questions, and what we will try to do is answer all these questions in an open format that we will post for you to download and review. So we do appreciate the questions that you submit to us. We will take the time to answer them. So if you want to ask more than one question, now is definitely the time to do it. In regards to this presentation, we are now at the end. So on behalf of Conde Systems Incorporated, Conde TV, National Business Media, and the MBM shows, we'd like to thank you for tuning into our webinar presentation of which transfer paper do I use with this. Next time, my name is Douglas DeWitt, Transfer Paper Product Manager here at Conde Systems. My time is up, and I thank you for yours.